The official report they filed with the state board claims my partner was dragged under by a 14-foot bull gator.
They wrapped it up nice and neat.
But here's the thing. A gator doesn't leave a man's severed radio sitting right on my front porch.
It just doesn't happen. And it sure as hell doesn't stand up on two legs to tap on my toll booth window.
Every single morning at exactly 2 a.m. I've been a wildlife warden down here in the deep Everglades for 32 years.
I've seen just about everything this place has to throw at a man.
I've navigated the river of grass in the pitch black with nothing but a dying flashlight.
Just listening to the sawgrass brush against the hull of my airboat.
You spend enough time out here, you learn things. I know the smell of a brewing hurricane way before the barometer even drops. I know the difference between the splash of a leaping tarpon and that heavy, silent shift in the water. The kind that means a massive predator is slipping right off the bank.
I know the rules of this swamp.
And the most important rule you gotta learn, the swamp does not care about you. Not even a little bit. It's a living, breathing, ancient thing. And it holds on to a memory that goes back way further than human history. When you take something from it that doesn't belong to you, it always finds a way to balance the scales. I just never expected it to use me to do it. My name's Elias, and I run Outpost Four. It's a decaying cinder block way station at the end of a dead turnpike road. Sinks a little deeper into the muck every rainy season. We're 40 miles of black water from the nearest highway. The job was supposed to be simple. Me and my two deputies, we monitor the airboat traffic and chase off the poachers. We also got to make sure tourists don't wander off the trail and become part of the food chain. Up until 3 weeks ago, I had a 22-year-old rookie named Toby. Good kid, from up north, fresh out of forestry school. He had a head full of ideals, but a heart totally unsuited for the bayou. He believed in conservation and doing everything by the book. He still had that bright, annoying optimism that usually gets sweated out of you down here. I liked him, though. It reminded me why I took this job in the first place. Julian, on the other hand, was born in the mud. Second-generation swamp rat, 10 years younger than me, with a cynical streak a mile wide. He had this slick smile that never quite reached his eyes. We worked together for a decade, and I trusted him to watch my back. But I always knew Julian had a pretty flexible relationship with the law. He didn't see a sanctuary out there. He just saw an unharvested bank account. Still, out here, you rely on the men beside you. When things go south in the Glades, they're the only backup you've got. You gotta trust them with your life, 'cause the swamp sure won't save you. 3 weeks ago, everything went wrong. It was a Tuesday night, thick with a suffocating heat that made the air feel like warm soup. The cicadas were screaming so loud, they drowned out the station's generator. Julian and Toby took the skiff out for a routine check along the eastern boundary. We call it the Mangrove Labyrinth. It's a twisting nightmare of roots and black water where GPS signals just bounce and die. I was back at the station when the radio crackled. Just static, a wet crunch, and then a scream I'll never forget. The sound of a man who realized he was already dead. I scrambled to the radio, shouting their call signs. I kept demanding a location, just begging for a response. But nothing came back except the mocking hiss of dead air. I didn't even wait for backup. I grabbed my rifle, fired up the airboat, and tore straight into the pitch-black swamp. The engine was screaming as I pushed it through the fog. It took me 40 agonizing minutes to finally find their skiff. It was wedged high up into the roots of an ancient cypress tree. The hull was cracked, and the motor was just idling in the mud. Julian was sitting right there in the bow, just covered in swamp muck. He was shivering uncontrollably, even though it was 80 degrees out. His uniform was torn up, and his hands were stained dark. I killed the engine and vaulted into the skiff, grabbing him by the shoulders. I shook him hard, demanding to know where the kid was. He just looked up at me with these wide, vacant eyes. He told me a story that made my blood run cold. He said they stalled out, and Toby leaned over the edge to clear some hydrilla from the prop. He said the kid was just trying to get them moving again. Julian claimed a massive bull gator launched out of the black water and dragged Toby under. He said he fired blindly into the water, trying to reach for the boy's hand. But within seconds, the swamp just went completely still. I spent the next 3 days dragging that swamp with a grappling hook. The local authorities sent out dive teams, and the tribal police sent their best trackers. We found absolutely nothing. The water had simply swallowed him whole. The official investigation was brief, chalking it up to a rare gator attack. Julian played the traumatized survivor perfectly at the memorial service. He stood at the podium in a crisp uniform, crying and talking about how brave the kid was. But I knew something was deeply wrong. The pieces of Julian's story just didn't fit together. If you try to grab a man being dragged under, your hands get wet. But I remembered clearly. Julian's sleeves had been bone dry. Julian didn't act like a guy eaten alive by guilt. He acted like a man who just hit the jackpot. Showed up driving a brand new lifted truck. Started flashing this heavy gold watch around the station. Say his uncle died and left him an inheritance. I didn't buy a single word of it. I started digging through the station's old logbooks, going over every patrol route Julian and Toby took. And pretty soon, I spotted a pattern. Whenever they patrolled the Eastern Labyrinth, they always came back hours late. I remembered Toby coming into my office 2 days before he died. He looked real nervous, just shifting from foot to foot. Said he needed to talk about something he found out east. But my radio buzzed, and I waved him off. That memory started eating away at me like acid. My answers didn't come from the cops. They came straight from the swamp itself. It was exactly 2 weeks later, right around 2 in the morning. I was sitting at my desk, nursing my 3rd cup of black coffee. Outside, this thick, rolling fog had swallowed the marsh whole. The station was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that actually hurts your ears. Suddenly, the perimeter alarms chimed. Then I heard the heavy clack of the exterior floodlights slamming on. A blinding white glare lit up the fog right outside my window. I figured it was just a stray boar tripping the sensors. I stood up, stretched my back, and walked over to the glass. I wiped the condensation off the window with my sleeve, and I peered out into that harsh white glare. Standing right under the center floodlight was a silhouette. My breath just caught in my throat. I froze. It wasn't a boar. And it sure as hell wasn't a man. The floodlights hit a creature that defied all logic. It was easily 9 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, hunched forward with this heavy, muscular slouch, covered in thick scales that gleamed like wet obsidian. It had the armored back of an ancient gator with a massive, dragging tail. I couldn't move a muscle. My hand just hovered over the radio, shaking. My brain was screaming that I was hallucinating from the exhaustion, but the smell told me it was real. This foul stench of rotting fish and ozone seeped right through the glass. The creature didn't even move toward the station. It just stood there like a statue carved out of the swamp. Its head was massive, like a prehistoric caiman. But its eyes, That's what paralyzed me. They glowed this pale, luminescent yellow, and they were locked directly onto me. We just stared at each other for 10 agonizing minutes. It didn't roar or posture. It just waited with this terrifying, absolute patience. Then the automated timer kicked in, and the floodlights flickered off. When the lights buzzed back on, the lane was completely empty. The thing was just dawn. No splash. No heavy footsteps retreating into the brush. Just the empty, rolling fog pressing against the glass. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. I just sat in my chair with my service weapon drawn, staring at the door until the sun came up. I kept trying to convince myself it was a waking nightmare. Just some stress-induced phantom. When dawn finally broke, I walked out to the toll lane. I fully expected to find the asphalt completely clean. I kinda needed to see that there was nothing out there, just to prove my own insanity. But the mud was there. Massive, three-toed footprints pressed an inch deep into the hard-packed dirt shoulder. They led right up to the edge of the asphalt and just stopped. Then I saw it. Sitting perfectly centered on the concrete block beneath the floodlight was an object. I walked over to it, my boots crunching in the quiet morning air. I looked down and my stomach just plummeted. It was Toby's radio. It was caked in dried mud and algae, with the antenna snapped off. But I recognized that neon orange tape he wrapped around the handle. Chilling realization. The lanyard wasn't chewed through. It had been neatly, cleanly unclipped. A gator doesn't unclip a radio lanyard. And a gator sure as hell doesn't place a piece of evidence perfectly under a floodlight. I picked it up with a trembling hand. It was ice cold. The swamp was communicating with me. The Seminole elders used to tell stories about this. They called it the Cochokpi, the deep water judge. They believed when a profound injustice happens and blood gets hidden in the mud, the swamp manifests a guardian to correct the balance. I always brushed those stories off as campfire folklore. But holding that broken radio, I knew they were right. Julian didn't just lose Toby to an animal. He did something to him. And whatever was out there in the dark knew exactly what it was. I didn't say a word to Julian about the visit. He was supposed to come back from leave on Monday. I had to figure out what I was dealing with before he showed up. Why did this thing bring me the radio? Was it a threat? Or was it handing me a puzzle? The next night, I just stayed awake in the dark office. I sat there staring at the security monitors for hours. The station was so quiet, it actually hurt my ears. I just kept my eyes glued to those grainy screens, waiting. Then, right at 2 a.m., the perimeter alarm chimed.
The breakers clacked and the exterior floodlights slammed on.
It was back. This time, the thing was way closer. It was standing maybe 20 yards from the reinforced glass of the toll booth. The sheer size of it was just staggering. I could actually hear the wet, heavy rasp of its breathing right through the glass. It slowly raised one of its massive, clawed hands. Then it pointed a single bone-white talon directly at my window. It just held that pose for a long, terrifying moment, staring right through me. Then it finally turned around, its heavy tail dragging across the asphalt. It vanished into the tree line right as the lights flickered. Just like that, the lane was totally empty again. I waited until the sun came up before I went outside. Right where the creature had been standing, there was something else waiting for me. It was a heavy, waterproof canvas pouch, the exact kind we used to store flare guns on the boats. I picked the thing up, and it felt heavy. I unzipped the top, and my breath just hitched in my throat. Inside
was this thick, leather-bound ledger.
The pages were a little damp, but I could still read them perfectly. I opened it up and started reading. It was a meticulous, handwritten record of transactions. Dates, GPS coordinates, and massive dollar amounts filled every page. And the handwriting was unmistakably Julian's.
As I turned the pages, the horrifying truth hit me like a freight train.
Julian wasn't just turning a blind eye to some local poachers. He was running a massive, highly organized exotic animal smuggling ring right under my nose. The ledger laid it all out in black and white. He was trapping and selling protected species right under our noses. Panther cubs, albino hatchlings, you name it. He used our own patrol skiffs to move them through the deep channels. He was fencing them to private collectors and black market brokers down in Miami. The numbers on those pages were absolutely staggering. Julian was pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was using his warden badge as the ultimate cover. Then I flipped to the very last entry. It was dated the exact same day Toby went missing. There wasn't an animal listed, just some GPS coordinates out in the eastern grid. Next to it, heavily underlined, was one word: compromised. The whole sick puzzle slammed together right then and there.
Toby didn't just stumble onto some random poacher's camp.
He found Julian's holding pens. And knowing Toby with his strict morals, there's no way he was going to take a bribe.
He probably told Julian they were heading back to the station to report it.
Julian saw his entire empire and his freedom about to vanish, so he made a choice. He didn't lose that kid to a gator. He fed him to the swamp to shut him up. The rage that washed over me was completely blinding. It was just this hot, suffocating wave of pure hatred. Bitter betrayal. I trusted the guy, broke bread with him. I treated Toby like a son, and my own partner slaughtered him for a paycheck. But I'm an old man, and I know that rage without a plan just gets you killed. If I took that ledger to the state police, Julian would just deny it. He'd say I forged it, or try to pin the whole ring on Toby. I looked out toward the tree line where that thing vanished. It didn't kill me. It brought me the evidence. It didn't want me to arrest Julian. It wanted me to bring him out to the deep water. It wanted me to facilitate the swamp's justice. Julian came back to duty that Monday. He strolled in with a fresh haircut, a crisp uniform, and this practiced look of solemn duty. He actually clapped me on the shoulder and asked how I was holding up. The sheer audacity of it made my stomach turn, but I forced a tired smile. I told him I was glad he was back, that the station felt empty without him. I lied right to his face, setting the trap. For the next 3 days, I just played the part of the exhausted, grieving veteran. I let Julian take the easy patrols and watched his confidence grow. He really thought he was untouchable. He thought the swamp had just swallowed his sins and washed his hands clean. On Thursday afternoon, I finally made my move. I waited until Julian was in the break room pouring some coffee. I walked in carrying that waterproof canvas pouch the creature left me, and I tossed it right onto the table between us. I told him I took a ride out to the eastern grid and found it wedged in the roots where their boat stalled. I watched the color completely drain from his face. It was replaced by this sickly, pale gray. He set his mug down, his hand shaking just a little bit, and asked what was inside. I leaned against the door frame, blocking the exit. I told him I didn't know, but I was handing it over to the state investigators tomorrow. Julian swallowed hard. You could practically see the gears turning in his head, the panic rising up behind his eyes. He forced this tight, unnatural smile and offered to log it into evidence himself. I told him there was no need, So I picked the pouch back up and hooked it right to my belt. Then I casually mentioned I was heading out to the toll booth tonight to fix the perimeter sensors. I watched his posture shift. His shoulders squared up, and his hand instinctively brushed against the grip of his sidearm. He knew he couldn't let me hand that ledger over. In his mind, there was only one way out. He told me to do what I had to do, and his eyes were just dead. The tension in the station for the rest of the day was absolutely suffocating. When the sun went down, the thick, heavy fog started rolling in off the marsh. At midnight, I walked out to the toll booth and locked the heavy steel door behind me. I set the canvas pouch on the console, drew my heavy revolver, and laid it right next to my hand. I turned off the interior lights and just waited. I knew Julian was coming. Out here in the dark, with no witnesses around, an old man working on electrical breakers could easily suffer a fatal accident. At 1:45, a shadow detached from the building. Julian moved with the silent grace of a hunter. He crept along the asphalt, using the sawgrass for cover. I saw his drawn sidearm gleaming in the moonlight. He didn't know I was watching through the tinted glass. He thought I was distracted by the breaker box. I clicked the radio on, broadcasting over the loudspeakers. I told him he didn't have to do this. Julian froze, realizing he was caught. He stepped onto the asphalt, pointing his weapon at the booth. His voice was tight with adrenaline as he called my name. He ordered me to leave the pouch. I told him I knew he killed Toby. My voice was steady, though my heart was hammering. I called him a coward for killing a kid over money. I reminded him how he cried to Toby's mother. Julian let out a bitter laugh, calling Toby a fool. He complained this state paid us pennies. He bragged about making 50 grand on illegal animal sales. He claimed Toby forced his hand. I gripped the console and asked if I was forcing his hand. Julian stepped closer, closing the distance. He told me he respected me, but I was a dinosaur. He said I belonged to the past. He promised if I slid the pouch out, he'd leave forever. I told him softly that I couldn't do that. I glanced down at the digital clock. It said exactly 1:58 a.m. Julian snarled that I left him no choice, aiming his weapon. I leaned into the microphone, dropping to a whisper. I told him he didn't own the swamp. He broke the rules, and the deep water doesn't forgive. The clock ticked to 1:59 a.m. Julian screamed at me to shut up, tightening his finger. He yelled it was my last chance. Then the clock struck 2 a.m., and the alarms shrieked. The halogen floodlight slammed on, blinding the lane. Julian flinched, raising a hand to shield his eyes. And then he froze completely. Standing directly behind him was the anomaly. It hadn't come from the trees. It rose straight out of the drainage ditch right next to the road. It towered over Julian, dripping with thick black mud and swamp weeds. It blocked out the floodlights, casting this massive, terrifying shadow over him. Julian slowly lowered his hand. He didn't even try to turn around. His primal instincts were screaming at him not to move a muscle. He could hear the wet, heavy rasp of its breathing right behind him. The stench of rotting meat and ozone was overpowering. The creature slowly lowered its massive head. It brought that long, crocodilian snout just inches from the back of Julian's neck. A low, vibrating growl rumbled from deep inside its chest. It was so deep, it actually rattled the reinforced glass of my booth. Julian finally snapped. He spun around, screaming in pure, unadulterated terror, and raised his weapon. He pulled the trigger 3 times. The shots were deafening in the quiet swamp. The hollow point rounds hit the creature dead in the chest. The beast didn't even flinch. The bullets just slammed into its thick obsidian scales and deflected harmlessly into the fog. It didn't bleed. It didn't roar.
It just stood there, completely unfazed by the gunfire.
It simply reached out with one massive clawed hand. It wrapped those thick talons entirely around Julian's torso. Julian's screams turned into a ragged wheeze as the air was violently crushed right out of his lungs.
His gun clattered uselessly onto the asphalt.
The creature lifted him off the ground like he weighed absolutely nothing.
Julian kicked and thrashed, clawing desperately at the beast's armored arm.
But it was like trying to pry open a steel vault with his bare hands. Then the anomaly slowly turned its head. Those glowing, luminescent yellow eyes locked right onto me through the glass. It wasn't looking at me like prey.
It was looking right into my soul. I stood there, completely paralyzed, my hand hovering right over my revolver.
I could have fired through the glass to try and save him. But looking into those eyes, I didn't see mindless rage. I saw an ancient intelligence. I saw the swamp reclaiming a debt.
I knew this was justice.
I slowly pulled my hand away from my gun. I took a step back from the glass and I just nodded. The creature held my gaze for one more second, acknowledging the choice I made.
It finally broke eye contact and just turned away from the glass.
It didn't try to tear him apart or anything crazy like that. It just held him pinned tight against its chest and stepped off the asphalt. Without even hesitating, it walked right down into the deep black water of that drainage ditch. Julian was thrashing around like a wild man, but that grip was like a steel vise. The swamp muck and the weeds just swallowed them both whole. His final scream got cut off real quick by this heavy, churning splash. The surface of the ditch just bubbled violently for a few seconds. Mud and torn lily pads were swirling around where it dragged him under. And then the whole swamp just went dead silent. The cicadas stopped humming. The frogs quit croaking. Nothing. The water slowly settled back down into this glassy, undisturbed mirror. I stood frozen inside that toll booth for a long time. My breathing was pretty much the only sound left in the world. I just watched the water, waiting to see if anything would come back up. But nothing did. Eventually, I forced myself to step outside and look down at the asphalt. 3 brass shell casings were shining right there under the floodlights. And a few feet away was Julian's abandoned handgun. I walked over and picked up his gun. I pulled out my shirt and carefully wiped the metal clean of any prints. I had to make sure there wasn't a single piece of evidence left behind. I tossed the wiped gun deep into the black water and watched it sink. Then I just used my boot to kick those shell casings over the edge into the mud. The swamp had claimed Julian, and now it was taking his mistakes too. I turned my back on the lane and walked slowly back inside the station. I sat down heavy at my desk while the office lights buzzed overhead. I opened the drawer and pulled out a blank incident report form. I picked up my pen and just stared at the blank lines for a second. Then I started writing a story about a routine check and a tragic slip on the bank. I was burying the truth in paperwork, letting the swamp keep its real justice. I filed that report the very next morning.
The state investigators came out in full force.
They set up all their gear right on the edge of the asphalt. They dragged that deep drainage ditch for hours, sent the dive teams down into the black water, looking for any trace of him. But they found absolutely nothing. No body, no torn clothes. The water just swallowed him whole. They held another memorial service a few days later. talked all about the tragedy of losing 2 brave men to the wild in a single month.
They went on about the unpredictable dangers of the Everglades.
I just stood in the back in my dress uniform and kept my mouth shut.
That was 3 weeks ago.
I'm completely alone at Outpost Four now.
State board's sending a couple of new rookies down next month to fill the empty spots.
I'm gonna have to teach him how to navigate the river of grass.
I'll teach him how to spot the signs of poachers and how to survive this brutal humidity.
But more importantly, I'll teach him the most important rule of the deep water.
The swamp doesn't care about your ambition, and it sure doesn't care about your greed. It operates on an ancient, unyielding system of balance.
When you take a life from the mud with malice in your heart, the mud's eventually gonna rise up and take yours.
It's a terrifying, perfect kind of justice. I still sit at my desk late at night, nursing black coffee and watching the fog roll in over the marsh.
The station is quiet.
The cicadas scream, and the humidity just presses against the glass. But I don't dread the darkness anymore, because I know that every morning at exactly 2 a.m., those perimeter alarms are going to chime. The floodlights will slam on, cutting right through that milky void. And I'll walk over to the window, wipe away the condensation, and look out into the glare. The 9-foot anomaly doesn't bring me clues anymore. It doesn't point, and it doesn't leave items on the concrete block. It just stands there under the brilliant white light, its yellow eyes watching the toll booth. And we just stare at each other through the mist.
2 old wardens of the deep water, acknowledging the silence.
So if you ever find yourself driving down a crumbling asphalt road in the dead of night and you see the halogen lights of a way station cutting through the fog, turn around. Because the official report might say it was just a bull gate. But a gator doesn't stand up on 2 legs and tap on my window every morning at exactly 2 a.m. Sun comes up and burns off that thick fog, making the labyrinth look real peaceful. Water turns to glass, reflecting those old cypress trees like nothing bad ever goes down out here. But this swamp, it's a master at burying its sins right under a pretty surface.
It just swallows the truth whole and keeps on growing.
Had to clean out Julian's locker a few days after the service.
Felt kind of like digging around in a dead man's grave, pulling out those crisp shirts and polished boots.
Found another heavy gold watch tucked way in the back, still in its velvet box. I just left it sitting there on the metal shelf, letting the dust have it. Toby's broken radio never made it into the official evidence locker. I keep it right on my desk next to the dispatch console. It's a daily reminder of the real cost of doing business out here in the mud. That neon orange tape is starting to peel, and every time I see it, I think about the kid's optimism. Julian's brand new lifted truck is still sitting out in the gravel lot. State hasn't sent anyone to tow it yet, and the swamp's already taken it back. Dead leaves are choking the wipers, and green pollen is coating that expensive paint job. It's just a monument to the greed that got him killed. Took the airboat out to the eastern boundary yesterday, just to feel the silence. The labyrinth feels different to me now. Heavier, like it's watching me. I cut the engine near that old cypress grove where we found Toby's skiff. If you listen close enough to the wind, you can almost hear the echoes of that night. While I was sitting there, a massive bull gator slid off the bank into the black water. Didn't make a single sound, just a heavy, silent shift on the surface. I watched those ripples fade and thought about that official report sitting up in Tallahassee. You know, the lie is just so much easier for folks to swallow than the truth. I dug out an old journal from my early days, back when I hung around the Seminole elders. Pages are all yellowed and brittle now, filled with my messy notes on their stories.
I traced my finger over the word Cochokpi, the deep water judge. They knew the rules of this swamp way before we ever poured concrete out here.
Spent the afternoon patching up the chain link fence behind the station.
It's kind of pointless, really. Just busy work to keep my hands moving and my mind quiet.
A fence might keep out a stray panther, but it won't stop the swamp when it wants in.
Still, sticking to the routine keeps me grounded. Barometer started dropping fast around sunset, meaning a storm's brewing over the Gulf. Air gets so heavy you can practically drink it, and the sky turns black and purple.
All the wildlife goes dead silent, just hunkering down in the mud to wait it out.
It's in these quiet, heavy moments before the rain hits that I feel the most alone. When those first heavy drops started hitting the tin roof, I walked out onto the porch. Leaned against the railing, just letting that cool mist wash over my face. I'm the keeper of this outpost now, and the keeper of its darkest secret. As long as I'm breathing, I'm gonna stand watch over the deep water. I'm the only one left at Outpost 4 now.
State board's sending new rookies down next month.
Got their transfer papers right here.
2 fresh faces with no clue what they're walking into.
I'm gonna teach them how to navigate the river of grass, how to read the sawgrass and the currents. Say in a natural American voice, serious warning, how to survive when the radio just spits static.
They gotta learn a map is just a suggestion.
I'll teach them how to spot the signs of poachers.
The hidden snares, the cut fences.
Those little disturbances in the mud. They have to learn to see what the swamp is hiding.
And then I'll teach them the most important rule of the deep water.
The swamp does not care about your ambition. It doesn't care about your greed.
It has 0 patience for human arrogance. It operates on an ancient, unyielding system of balance.
When you take a life from the mud
will eventually rise up and take yours.
That's the true law of the Everglades.
I still sit at my desk late at night,
Nursing black coffee and watching the fog roll in.
The station is dead quiet.
The humidity just presses against the glass.
But I don't dread the darkness anymore.
That fear's been replaced by a strange kind of understanding. I know what's out there now. And I know exactly why it comes.
Because I know that every morning at exactly 2 a.m.,
the routine is gonna start. I watch the clock on the console tick over. It's the only appointment I've got left that matters.
Right on schedule, the perimeter alarms chime.
Just a soft electronic ping echoing through the office. A polite little announcement from the security system, letting me know we aren't alone anymore. Second later, the floodlights slam along it. You hear the harsh clack of the breakers. Then, a blinding burst of white light hits the fog. The stage is set.
I push myself up from the desk, feeling every bit of my 60 years.
I walk over to that reinforced glass window, looking out over the old toll lane.
The harsh white light from outside just spills right into the dark office. The humidity in here always coats the cold glass with a thick layer of sweat. I just raise my arm and use my sleeve to wipe away the moisture. It clears a little porthole into the fog outside. I lean in close to the glass and peer out into that blinding glare. The milky white fog just rolls across the cracked asphalt, swirling around the light poles. At first glance, it looks like an empty, desolate stretch of swamp road. But then, the silhouette solidifies in the mist. Standing directly beneath the center floodlight is the anomaly. It doesn't bring me clues anymore, and it doesn't leave broken radios on the concrete block. It just stands there, an ancient guardian bathed in the brilliant white light. Its massive, armored body is perfectly still. Those glowing yellow eyes are locked directly onto the toll booth, just watching me through the mist. We just stare at each other through the swirling fog. We're two old wardens of the deep water, silently acknowledging each other.
There's no hostility out there anymore. Just a profound, heavy silence.
It waits patiently for a few minutes, just breathing slow and steady.
It's making sure I'm still here, standing my post.
It's ensuring that the ancient, unyielding balance of the swamp is maintained.
Then the automated timer on the breaker box clicks.
The massive halogen floodlights flicker, plunging the lane into absolute darkness for a split second. The sudden absence of light is jarring.
When the lights buzz back on a moment later, the lane is completely empty.
The creature vanishes back into the wild without making a single sound. There's nothing left but the empty rolling fog and the hum of the electricity. So, if you ever find yourself driving down a crumbling asphalt road in the dead of night and you see those halogen lights cutting through the fog, turn around.
Don't step out of your car. Stay out of the tree line.
The swamp has its own justice, and it never forgets. I keep Julian's ledger locked away in a rusted metal box. It's a dark reminder of the greed that poisoned this place. I buried his secret, just like the swamp buried him. Some truths are just too dangerous for the world of men. When dawn breaks, I walk out to the dock and just watch the water. The morning mist burns off, showing the real Everglades. It looks peaceful in the daylight. But I know the violence sleeping right under that glassy surface. Out in the mangrove labyrinth, things have gone back to their ancient rhythm. Say in a natural American voice, awestruck, the rare ghost orchids are blooming again, completely untouched. Julian's old traps are just rusting away out there. The swamp is already swallowing them up. Julian's brand new truck is still sitting in the gravel lot. It hasn't moved an inch in weeks. Dead leaves are piling up on the windshield.
The swamp is already starting to claim that, too.
I put Toby's broken radio up on the top shelf in the office.
It sits right next to the old logbooks.
It's kind of like a silent memorial for a kid who just wanted to do the right thing. I make sure to wipe the dust off it every Sunday.
The state board says the new rookies are getting here on Monday.
So I spend the afternoon tuning up the airboat engine. Checking the life jackets, the flares, the ropes. Everything's got to be strictly by the book from now on. I look out over the endless miles of sawgrass. The river of grass is beautiful, but it doesn't care about us. It's completely indifferent to the men who try to tame it. I gotta make sure these new kids understand that before they even step on a boat. Back inside, I pin a fresh map of the eastern grid to the board. I take a thick red marker and draw a hard line right around the mangrove labyrinth. That whole area is officially off limits now. It belongs to the deep water. The sun starts to set, casting these long, bruised shadows over the outpost. The daytime heat breaks, but that sticky humidity rolls right in. Then the cicadas start up their deafening hum. It's the signal that the swamp is waking up for the night. I head into the break room and pour a fresh cup of black coffee. I sit back down at my desk and check the clock. It's almost midnight. Just 2 hours left until the alarms chime, and my silent watch begins again. I don't dread the darkness anymore. I know exactly what's waiting for me out there in the fog. Every single morning, right at 2 a.m., the perimeter alarms chime. The heavy breakers clack loudly in the quiet station. And those massive halogen floodlights slam on, cutting right through the milky void. It turns the pitch-black swamp into a blinding, brilliant stage. I slowly get up from my desk, feeling the ache in my bones. I walk over to the reinforced glass of the toll booth. I raise my sleeve and wipe away the thick condensation. I look out into that blinding white glare, squinting against the light. And right there, standing dead center on the asphalt, is the anomaly. 9 feet of ancient armored muscle just waiting for me. It doesn't bring me clues anymore, like it did with Julian. It doesn't point a taloned finger, and it doesn't leave broken radios on the concrete.
Its work as the deep-water judge is already done.
It just stands there, completely motionless, bathed in the harsh light.
Chilling detail. Those pale, luminescent yellow eyes are locked right onto the toll booth, looking right through the glass, directly at me.
We just stare at each other through the swirling, heavy mist.
2 old wardens of the deep water, standing on opposite sides of the glass.
Just silently acknowledging each other and the heavy burden we carry.
It waits patiently for a few minutes, breathing heavy in the humid air.
Is just making sure I'm still here, keeping my watch,
making absolutely sure that the ancient balance of the swamp is maintained.
Then the automated timer on the floodlights finally clicks. The lights flicker violently, plunging the entire lane into absolute darkness. Just for a fraction of a second, the world goes completely black. And when the lights buzz back on a moment later, it's gone.
Vanished right back into the wild, without making a single sound. Swallowed up by the deep water and the rolling fog, like it was never even there.
So, if you ever find yourself driving down a crumbling asphalt road in the dead of night,
just you and the hum of your engine,
surrounded by a whole lot of nothing,
you're miles away from cell service out here. The GPS is gonna bounce and die.
There's no one coming to help you if you break down on the shoulder.
And you look out through your windshield and see the halogen lights of a way station cutting through the fog,
just glowing out there in the dark like a beacon.
Do yourself a massive favor and turn around.
Just put the car in reverse and drive away as fast as you can. Don't even think about stopping.
Do not step out of your vehicle.
Keep your doors locked tight and your windows rolled all the way up. Don't let the quiet fool you. And whatever you do, do not wander into the tree line.
Because the swamp is always watching.
And it doesn't care if you're just lost.
Because the official state report might tell you it was just a 14-foot bull gator.
That's the story they feed the public to keep the tourists coming.
They'll say a gator dragged a man under the black water.
It's a neat, believable little lie that wraps everything up in a bow.
But I know better. Because a gator doesn't leave a man's severed radio sitting perfectly on my front porch.
It doesn't unclip a nylon lanyard with that kind of precision.
And it certainly doesn't stand up on 2 legs
and tap its claws on my toll booth window every single morning at exactly 2 a.m.
I'm alone at Outpost 4 down.
The state board's sending a couple of new rookies down next month to fill the vacancies.
I'm going to teach them how to navigate the river of grass.
I'll teach them how to spot the signs of poachers.
And I'm going to teach them the most important rule of the deep water.
The swamp doesn't care about your ambition.
It doesn't care about your greed. It operates on an ancient, unyielding system of balance.
When you take a life from the mud
will eventually rise up and take yours.
I still sit at my desk late at night,
sipping black coffee, just watching the fog roll in over the marsh. The station is quiet. The cicadas scream, and the humidity just presses against the glass.
But I don't dread the darkness anymore,
because I know that every morning at exactly 2 a.m., the perimeter alarms are gonna chime, and the floodlights will slate them on. I'll walk over to the window, wipe away the condensation, and look out into the glare. The anomaly doesn't bring me clues anymore.
It doesn't point, and it doesn't leave items on the concrete block.
It just stands there, under the brilliant white light.
Its yellow eyes watching the toll booth.
We stare at each other through the mist. Two old wardens of the deep water, acknowledging the silence.
It waits patiently, ensuring the balance is maintained.
Then the lights flicker, and it vanishes back into the wild.
So, if you ever find yourself driving down a crumbling asphalt road in the dead of night,
you're miles away from cell service, and the darkness just seems to swallow everything whole. You might think you're just taking a detour, but out here, the swamp plays tricks on your mind, and the fog rolls in thicker than you can imagine. And then you see them. The halogen lights of a way station, cutting through the fog like a knife.
if you see those lights, do yourself a favor and turn around.
Just put it in drive and don't look back. Whatever you do, do not step out of your vehicle.
The ground out here doesn't belong to us. And for the love of God, do not wander into the tree line.
There are things in those shadows that have been waiting a very long time, because the official report might tell you a nice, neat story. They'll say it was just a 14-foot bull gator that dragged a man under. But a gator doesn't leave a man's severed radio sitting perfectly on my front porch. An animal doesn't unclip a lanyard. And it certainly doesn't stand up on two legs in the middle of the night.
It doesn't walk up to the glass, look you dead in the eye, and tap on my toll booth window every morning at exactly 2 a.m.
It's just me out here now. The state board says they're sending a couple of new rookies down next month. Gotta fill the vacancies, right?
I'll teach them how to navigate the river of grass.
I'll teach them how to spot the signs of poachers. But more importantly, I'm going to teach him the one rule that actually matters out here. The swamp doesn't care about your ambition. It sure doesn't care about your greed. This place operates on an ancient, unyielding system of balance. It's a living thing. And when you take a life from the mud is eventually going to rise up and take yours.
Julian thought he could outsmart it.
Thought he could use this wilderness like his own personal bank account. But the deep water doesn't forgive. It just swallows you whole and goes right back to being still. I still sit at my desk late at night, just nursing black coffee and watching the fog roll in. The station gets so quiet, it kind of presses against your eardrums.
Just the cicadas screaming and the humidity.
But I don't dread the darkness anymore. I really don't. I know exactly what's waiting out there in the mist. And I know it's not coming for me. Every morning at exactly 2 a.m., those perimeter alarms are gonna chime. The floodlights will slam on. And I'll walk over to the window, wipe away the condensation, and look out into the glare. It doesn't bring me clues anymore. It doesn't point, and it doesn't leave broken radios on the concrete block. It just stands there, under that brilliant white light, its yellow eyes just watching the toll booth. We stare at each other through the mist. Two old wardens of the deep water, just acknowledging the silence. It waits patiently for a few minutes, just making sure I'm still here. Making sure the balance is maintained. Then the lights flicker, and it vanishes right back into the wild. I am alone at Outpost 4 now. State board's sending a couple new rookies down next month to fill the vacancies. I'll teach them how to navigate the river of grass. Teach them how to spot the signs of poachers. And I'll teach them the most important rule of the deep water. The swamp does not care about your ambition. It doesn't care about your greed. It operates on an ancient, unyielding system of balance. When you take a life from the mud will eventually rise up and take yours. I still sit at my desk late at night, nursing black coffee and watching the fog roll in over the marsh. The station's quiet, but I don't dread the darkness anymore. Because I know that every morning at exactly 2 a.m., those perimeter alarms are gonna chime. The floodlights will slam on. And I'll walk over to the window, wipe away the condensation, and look out into the glare.
That 9-foot anomaly doesn't bring me clues anymore.
It just stands there, under the brilliant white light, its yellow eyes watching the toll booth. We stare at each other through the mist, two old wardens of the deep water, acknowledging the silence.
So, if you ever find yourself driving down a crumbling asphalt road in the dead of night, miles away from cell surface, and you see the halogen lights of a way station cutting through the fog,
Turn around. Do not step out of your vehicle.
because the official report might say it was just a 14-foot bull gator. But a gator doesn't leave a man's severed radio on my front porch.
And it sure as hell doesn't stand up on two legs and tap on my window every morning at exactly 2 a.m. So if you ever find yourself driving down a crumbling asphalt road in the dead of night,
Miles away from any cell service, and you see the halogen lights of a way station cutting through the fog,
do yourself a favor and turn around.
do not step out of your vehicle. Do not wander into the tree line. The swamp doesn't care about who you are or where you came from. It's a living, breathing thing with a very long memory. The official report might say it was just a 14-foot bull gator. That's what they tell the families to help them sleep at night.
But a gator doesn't leave a man's severed radio on my front porch.
It doesn't unclip a lanyard and leave it perfectly centered under a floodlight. I'm going to be out here for a long time. Just me, the mosquitoes, and the deep water. I know the rules now, and I know exactly what happens when you break them. We have an understanding, the swamp and I, because a gator certainly doesn't stand up on two legs.
And it doesn't tap on my toll booth window every morning at exactly 2 a.m.
The deep water doesn't forgive. It just balances the scales.